Okay, welcome back. In the last video, we implemented automatic gunfire. In this video, we're going to take care of a problem that we have, and that's that when we jump, our character doesn't animate like they're jumping. In fact, if we're running and we jump, the character continues to run while in the air, and that is not ideal at all. We need a jump animation to play. So we're going to take care of jumping in this video, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, in our underscore game folder, we're going to go to character and open our shooter animation blueprint. Now, if we move up to the top, we'll see that we have ground locomotion. And ground locomotion only takes care of idle and jogging. There is no jumping. So go back out to the anim graph, and just under ground locomotion, we're going to create a new state machine, and this state machine is going to be called locomotion. So let's right click and type state machine and add new state machine, and let's name this locomotion. Now double click, and inside the locomotion state machine we're going to create some states. So drag off and add state, and we're going to call this first one idle/jogs. That's going to be the idle and jogging animations that we've already implemented. From idle jogs, we're going to drag off and create a new state called jumps. And from jumps, we'll have a new state, and we'll call this one jump_land. And from jump land, we'll have a transition back to idle jogs. Now, from idle jogs to jumps, we want to transition if we're in the air. So let's double click the transition rule, right click and type is in air, so we can get is in air and simply plug that in. Now let's go back out to locomotion and select that transition rule. From idle jogs to jumps, we want our duration for the blend to be very low. So let's put this to 0.01. Remember, these are values that you tweak until you get the animation looking just right. I've found that we want a short duration for this transition. Now, for jumps to jump land, we want to transition if we're not in the air anymore. So if we no longer need to play jumping animations and we need to go back to the jump land animation, we need this transition rule to take the is in air variable and use a not boolean to negate that truth value and get its opposite. In other words, if we're not in the air, then we can transition from jumps back to jump land. From jumps to jump land, we want this duration to be pretty low, like 0.1. And finally, from jump land to idle jogs, there's going to be a couple conditions that determine whether we should go from jump land to idle jogs or not. The first is going to be an automatic rule. In other words, we're going to select the transition rule, and in the details panel, we're going to check this checkbox next to automatic rule based on sequence player and state. So that way, when the jump land animation is complete, we'll automatically go to idle jogs. Now we can have multiple transition rules from one state to another by simply clicking and dragging to the other state, and now we'll have two rules. Hover over them and you can see that one of them says automatic rule. That's the one we created first and checked the automatic rule checkbox. Now the other one, we can add additional logic, so let's double click, and for this one, let's check to see if we're in air with is in air. And we'll hook this one up. Now, why are we doing this? Well, if we're still playing the jump land animation and we start jumping again, we want to transition back to idle logs because then B is in air will be true, and that will send us straight into the jumps animation again. So we have two transition rules. One is automatic and the other checks to see if B is in air becomes true. And that allows us to get out of the jump land animation and start the jump animations again. Now for the animations inside these states. Let's start with idle jogs. In idle jogs, we just want the ground locomotion, which we've cached. So we can say use cached pose, and we're going to use ground locomotion. Simply plug in the ground locomotion cache pose to output animation pose. Now back out to locomotion, let's take a look at the jump land state. For this one, we're going to use something called apply additive. right-click, type Apply Additive, and use the Apply Additive node. This takes a normal pose and adds an animation on top of it. For the base pose, we're going to use the ground locomotion. So use cached pose ground locomotion, and we're going to use that for the base pose. Now, what's the additive going to be? Now, if we search the asset browser for jump_recovery, you'll see that we have this jump recovery additive. Double click that, and you'll see that this is what it looks like. It's recovering from a jump. So back to our locomotion state machine, we're going to take jump recovery additive, drag it in, and use that for the additive pose. And then we'll plug this up to output animation pose. Now, this applies the additive animation on top of the ground locomotion, and the alpha tells us how much we want to see that animation. Let's go ahead and give a value of 0.6 for the alpha. So that takes care of jump land. Let's go back to locomotion, and what's left is the jump state. Double click on jumps. And for this one, we're going to create a new state machine inside of here to take care of the jumping. So right click and type state machine and add new state machine, and we'll call this jumps. Go ahead and hook that up, and now we're going to create this jump state machine. Double click on it. In here, we're going to string several jump animations together. Drag off of entry, click add state, and call this jump start. From jump start, we'll drag off, add a state, and we'll call this jump apex. This will be for the apex of the jump. And from jump apex, drag off, add state, and type jump pre-land. Now for both of these transition rules, we're going to check automatic rule based on sequence player and state and leave everything else the way it is. So make sure to do this for the first and the second transition rule. These will be automatic. For jump start, double click that state and search for jump start in the asset browser and drag in jump start. We can look at this animation and see that it's just the beginning of a jump. Back out to jumps, double click jump apex and find the animation called jump apex. Drag it in and connect that. If you want to see that one, it's what she looks like at the apex of a jump, or the highest point of the jump. Go back out to jumps, double click jump pre-land, and look for the jump pre-land animation, drag that in, hook it up. We can check this one out by double clicking, and we'll see that it's just before we're landing. Now it looks like it's a little bit fast, and after tweaking, we can alter the play rate for this one. So if we click in the details panel for play rate, we can slow this down to about 0.2. And that way we'll play it at about 20% the regular speed. Okay, so that takes care of our jumps state machine, and that is going in our output animation pose for the jump state in locomotion. Okay, so back out in the anim graph, we now have this locomotion state machine, and we're going to cache this off. So drag off, new save cached pose, and let's call this cached locomotion. We can go ahead and give this a comment with the C key and simply say cached locomotion, and in parentheses with jumps. Now in all the spots beneath it where we're using use cached ground locomotion, we can simply use cached locomotion instead. So right click and say use cached, and then we can select cached locomotion. Drag that in and delete the ground locomotion. So we did that here for cached ground locomotion with weapon fire slot. Now we can simply change this comment to cached locomotion with weapon fire slot. Now on the next one down, it says blend between ground locomotion and weapon fire. Now we can simply replace this cached ground locomotion with cached locomotion instead. So replace it with cached locomotion and remove the cached ground locomotion. And for the comment, we can remove the word ground because now we're just using cached locomotion instead. Now after caching this, we're calling it cached ground loco with fire. We can rename this and call it cached loco with fire. In the next one, idle with aiming upper body, there's nothing we need to change there. On the next one, we see ground loco with fire while aiming. And you'll see that we use cached pose, cached loco with fire, and we're also using cached pose, cached aiming upper body. There's nothing we need to replace there. But we're caching this to a pose called cached aiming ground loco with fire, but it's more appropriate to call this cached aiming loco with fire. So I'm going to take the word ground out of that cached pose. And for the comment, I'm going to take the word ground out of it as well. Let's go ahead and compile and save this and give it a test in the editor. So press play, engage in the viewport, and we'll jump. Now we're getting a bit of a glitch. It's playing an animation over again, and it looks like it might be jump pre-land because after the jump apex, we play jump pre-land and it looks like it's looping that animation. So let's go to Shooter Anim BP, back up to locomotion, and let's take a look at jumps. And in the jumps state machine, we'll go to jump pre-land and select play jump pre-land, and it looks like we're looping it. So uncheck loop animation and then go back and let's see if that fixes it. And sure enough, it no longer loops the jump pre-land animation and we have a smooth jump. Okay, so that covers jumping. That will conclude this video. In the next video, we're going to get started creating some basic items for our game. We'll start by creating a base item class and we'll build up upon it from there. See you in the next video.